there, listeners. Are you feeling the weight of the world? Well, you're not alone. The U.S. Surgeon General says nearly 50% of parents are overwhelmed by stress. And guess what? It's affecting us all. Just last year, we heard about an epidemic of loneliness hitting half our population, especially young adults. But there's hope. I'm Scarlett Lewis, founder of the Choose Love movement. We're dedicated to your safety, health, and well-being with proactive mental health strategies. Imagine a life where stress and loneliness are replaced by joy and connection. We've already reached millions with essential life skills to prevent violence, substance abuse, and mental illness. Want to join this life-changing movement? It's easy. Visit chooselovemovement.org today. Become a member, spread the word, and access our free resources. Together, we can create a loving, supportive community. Remember, all the nurturing, healing love you give comes back to you tenfold. Thank you for choosing love.
I choose love. I choose love.
Hi, my name is Scarlett Lewis, and I am the founder of the Jessie Lewis Choose Love movement. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Choose Love podcast. Today, I am interviewing John Romano, who perpetrated a school shooting 20 years ago in his high school in New York. He was 16 years old at the time. He shot at a few of his classmates and hit one of his teachers in the leg. He pled guilty and spent the next 17 years in federal prison. He's out now and shared his story on the Choose Love podcast in hopes that it will shed some light on how and why school shootings happen and how to prevent them. I ask when you listen to keep your heart open to his story and what he has to say. I believe people can make mistakes, horrific ones, and be rehabilitated and come back to their true essence, which is, of course, love. I say this with some credibility because I've worked for years in prisons and have met many men and women who have done horrific things that have been transformed by choosing love. I believe that John wants to be part of the solution. I think a powerful way of doing this is to share his story so that we can understand the pain beneath these devastating tragedies. I've spoken to other school shooters as well because I want to ask the questions I didn't get to ask the man who murdered Jessie. What happened that caused you to do this? What needs weren't met? What could have been done that would have kept you from committing these atrocities? The answers are usually very similar, and it has to do with being seen. You'll hear that in this podcast as well. Don't discount the importance of this. As humans, we are desperate for validation and to be noticed. This is becoming more difficult with our addiction to cell phones and the disconnection it creates. I hope the takeaway for you is to think differently when you read about the next school shooting, to pause in the choice moment and get curious about the point of pain that started the downward trajectory in their lives. And I hope you can thoughtfully respond with love by doing a positive action to be part of the solution. This can look like having the courage to step outside of your own busyness, distraction, or even pain to help someone, and forgiving those who've hurt you, to free yourself from pain and helping others do the same. Making sure your kids' school has Choose Love so they can learn the essential life skills that enable us to manage adversity and grow from it. I believe in forgiveness. John did the prison time and he's wanting to help now. I think his story can do this. Thanks for listening. And as always, thank you for choosing love. And thanks for joining us, John.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I've been reading up on your story and I'm quite amazed. And I can only imagine how difficult it is for you to be, doing everything that you have been, but you've managed to power through, and I respect that.
Yeah, I mean, I took a little bit of a different angle on what had happened than other people. And I really wanted to, instead of focusing on the problem, actually focus on the root cause of what started the problem so that we can address that and keep that suffering from happening, which I know that we can. And So I actually have a friend who sent me one of your TikToks,
Yeah.
and she said you should interview him for the Choose Love podcast. And I thought that was a great idea, because what I have been doing is literally asking, going to the source, asking individuals who have perpetrated these crimes, uh, what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
Because you were not born a school shooter. You were
Right.
born just like every other human being, but something happened that cultivated you into, you became a school shooter. And for our audience, um, a lot of our audience are educators, administrators, and parents. And I think that they would have the same burning question that I have been trying to figure out. What happened that got you from being what should have been a happy, well-adjusted kid into someone who wanted to murder his classmates and educators, who had this murderous rage? And so can you take us through your story, John, and help us understand what can lead somebody to getting to that place?
Yeah, because I think it's very important for us to be speaking directly to people who are working with our kids and adolescents, because they're the ones who are interacting with them when they're outside of the household. But especially for parents who might not be aware of what's going on within their children sometimes, or how to handle it when it's beyond their own knowledge of, how do you handle a child who is suddenly, like you said, going from what seems to be well adjusted to somebody who is suicidal or even homicidal. So I share my story, not to make excuses, not to blame anything,
Mhm.
but to give people that understanding of, here are some of the things that came together in my story, and hopefully, if we can identify it in others, we can prevent future tragedy. Because with me, yeah, my story pretty much starts in childhood. When I was 4 years old, my father left, and it kind of starts off with that feeling of abandonment. And then even he didn't want visitation rights. He didn't want anything to do with me in the beginning. Eventually he did. And when I started to have that every other weekend visits with him,
When did that
my half,
happen? So you were with a single mom.
yeah,
Was your mom a good mom?
yeah, no. So
Did she love you?
my mom was definitely doing everything she could to help me. And when I was at her house, everything was good. When I was with her side of the family, everything was good. It was more my father's side of the family that was very dysfunctional and toxic. When I would go over there, I had a half brother who lived with my dad. And when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, he was sexually abusing me. And this kind of I didn't know what he was doing to me, obviously, at that young age. I have learned that some of the things that I started to do were warning signs that maybe were missed, because I started to regress. Even at that age of 5, 6, 7, I started to suddenly carry around my security blanket again. I started to suck my thumb again. And I've had psychologists tell me that, yeah, this is signs of regression, to comfort yourself when a child no longer knows how to go through what's happening to them. They regress into that toddler like state. And I only share that because I hope that other people, if suddenly your small child is doing something like this and you're confused, it might be something to be mindful that they're going through something that they can't comprehend, that they can't process. So they're regressing into that younger mindset. But so other than that, though, for people on the outside looking in, I was somebody who was playing Little League for many years. I was played soccer. I had friends. My grades were pretty good. like I said, I was being raised by a single mother, but she was pretty amazing. And she was doing the best that she could at playing both roles. And she understood that my father wasn't a great role model, so she wanted to be the best role model that she could be. And for the most part, going into middle school, everything seemed to be fine. It wasn't until I was in the eighth grade that suddenly the other red flags started to appear. When my grades started to slip, I went from an A and B student to in eighth grade, I failed, or I was close to failing a class. And I was also at this time, unbeknownst to my mother or others, I started drinking with friends at 12, 13 years old.
Mhm.
Originally, it starts off as social, and then it becomes something more. And then it becomes something where, I started to feel something was missing within. I started to become more aware of what had happened to me at a younger age. I didn't know how people would react if anybody else knew about it. I started to believe that I had done something wrong, that I was guilty of something horrible.
Hey, John, can
And
I ask you how
yeah,
long did that go on? So your parents divorced when you were 4 years old, and then
right.
you said around when you were
So
five, that
So maybe
started
about 5, 6 years old, probably lasted for a year or two. It happened several times.
several
And
times. How often did you see your dad or go
so
over
I
there?
was seeing, I was going over there like every other weekend. Um, for the most part, there was plenty of times where, he would cancel for one reason or another. Um, but yeah, so that was a pretty reoccurring thing. Um, for, like I said, probably about a year or two. My sense of chronological, timing and everything at such a young age is kind of off.
Hmm.
Um,
Did you
however,
ever confront your half brother, your
I
stepbrother?
never spoke about it. I never dealt with it until I was already in prison, and even then, it wasn't confronting him. It was
Hmm.
just I was finally opening up and talking about this to kind of deal with the, I knew I had to open up and I had to be honest and vulnerable, not just with myself, but with other people around me in
Hmm.
order for me to get better. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, I didn't do that until I was already in prison and I'd already spread my suffering to others.
Okay, so let's go back to eighth grade when you started drinking with friends and you started failing classes and
Yeah, and
you started kind of, was it a sudden memory of what had happened when you were 5 or 6, or was this always something in the back of your head? Had you buried it for a while and it came back up? I'm just curious.
yeah, I had definitely buried it for a while, or maybe not even buried it as much as I didn't fully understand what had happened. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until I was a little bit older when I started becoming more sexually aware that I realized, looking back, just how horrible of a thing this was.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I started, smoking weed. Probably right after eighth grade, going into high school, I started smoking weed. I was seeking that out again, first with friends, but then I started smoking on my own. And my grades only got worse. And ninth grade, things only got worse. I stopped playing any sports. I was no longer, baseball had been my big thing growing up. I stopped doing that. I was still being social. So my mom and other people didn't really think of it as too much of a problem. They just figured, okay, he doesn't want to be out there playing sports, but he's still hanging out with his friends and using his time that way. Uh, but then the depression kind of slowly creeps in, and it's not like this sudden overnight everything is falling apart. It's this sudden creeping on of um, like I said, my grades were slipping in eighth grade, and then ninth grade they were slipping more and more to the point where I failed the class, had to go into summer school, and I just wasn't being me anymore.
I mean, were
And
you
that
still seeing your father during this time?
Yeah, so I was seeing my dad, and it was also the issue of now as I became older, I also saw that he was not the role model that I thought. Because even as a small child, even as he left me, there's also that young boy looking up to his dad and thinking that he's the greatest person no matter what. But when I got older, I also started to see that no, he was not that great of a person. He had a multitude of issues, and he just didn't have the capability of being there for anybody but himself. Um,
Where's
but
where's your stepbrother at this point?
my half brother, my half brother, he was about 9 years older than I was, and so he had gone. Let's see, right around 2000, he signed up for the military. And so then, of course, my freshman year of high school is when 9/11 happens, and he is sent overseas into Afghanistan. And we didn't have much of a relationship at that point. But there was also a part of me that still looked to him in a certain way for, okay, I was suppressing everything that happened. I didn't want to talk about what happened, but I was still looking for a brotherly relationship with him. And I was still looking for that acceptance and approval for him. And, when I was living at home with my mom, on my mom's side of the family, I also had a half brother and a half sister who were both a bit older. And, you know, things were going well with them. But so with the age gap, my sister's about 5 years older than I, and my brother, he's also about 9 years, 10 years older than I am. So I was never very super close with them. I was more close with my sister since she
Mhm.
was the closest in age with me. But when she went away to college and it was just me living at home with my mom, then it's just kind of a little bit of isolation, a little bit at home,
Mhm.
where when um, when I started to struggle more and more, she's no longer there because she was somebody who I could talk to a little bit. I never fully opened up with her,
Mhm.
but she was definitely my confidant. And
Mhm.
when she went away to college, it did kind of hurt a little bit.
But you
Um,
never told her about what happened with your half brother, right?
no, like I
Right.
said, I was opening up with her, and even when I started to go to therapy, because then in 10th grade, I finally broke down. I was in school one day and I called my mom and I said, listen, I can't do this anymore. Something's going on. Like I just don't feel right. I can't make it through the day. I can't make it to my next class. That's why the only trouble I'd really been getting in school was when I would just skip class. And sometimes it was just I just couldn't handle it. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to have anything to do with what was going on. And I would just leave. I would just go to the cafeteria and I would try to be more with friends and try to like distract myself with friendly conversation. Um, but so I was really going down that path. But when I opened up and said, I need help, I also started going to therapy, but didn't open up all the way. And
Mhm.
that's probably one of the biggest issues that I talk about with people is in order to be able to get your life better, it's important to open up, to be vulnerable, and to shed light on that darkness within. Because they started to give me medication, and for a lot of people that helps. For me, I started off on one antidepressant, and then that started to cause a little bit of anxiety. So they started to put me on anxiety medication, and then I had trouble sleeping, so they put me on sleeping pills. And then I was also eventually one of my teachers noticed I had been cutting myself, and I'd been covering it up, but one of my teachers noticed and called my mom and alerted the school and alerted everybody that this was going on. So my mom asked if I would be willing to voluntarily go into a mental hospital. And I said yes. I was believing that I'd only be there for a few days, just to get some intensive care and to get some help.
And when was this
And
in your 10th grade?
yeah, so this would have been 10th grade. And so when I went there, I I was told pretty much that no, we're going to keep you here as long as we please. And my understanding was, I thought, oh, I'm here voluntarily. I can leave whenever I want. No,
Mhm.
you're a minor. It's not up to you. It's up to your mom. And my mom was basically saying, whatever the doctor says, I'm
Mhm.
going with. Because
Mhm.
again, she was beyond her scope of knowledge to deal with somebody who is, I'm telling her and my therapist that I'm suicidal. She's now afraid that she's going to come home from work someday and find me dead.
Mhm.
So when I'm there in the hospital, I immediately say, "Oh, you've deceived me by telling me that I can leave whenever I want." That's how I went in. So I just started to lie and tell them whatever they wanted to hear in order to get out. And I was only there for a week and I hated it. And even this is when some of the problems with my school like really started to kick in, because when I was there, we had mandatory school time as well in the mental hospital, but my high school refused to send any schoolwork to the hospital for me to do. So I would literally just have to sit there and they would just give me a book to read. And they told me, "We've never seen this." And this is a local hospital. And they were telling me, "We deal with all the high schools in the area. We've never had this happen before." And I
Why do you think
started
they
to,
did that? Why do you think they did that?
well, as it turns out, when I left and when I started going back to the school, and I was asking for help, I was asking for an IEP,
Mhm.
I was asking for a reduction in my classes.
When you say was it you or was it your mom or was it you,
I mean, it was
combination of
both.
your therapist as well? Were they involved with the school?
Yeah. So
Okay.
everybody became involved where I
Okay.
was asking, and then, my mother reached out to them, and even my therapist was sending in, and my psychiatrist was sending in a letter basically saying, yes, he's been diagnosed with clinical depression, a reduction in classes or some type of IEP would be advisable to help him out.
Mhm.
And the school said no. Even in their own paperwork, they admitted that clinical depression is something that would make me eligible for this, but they said no. They did not believe that this was something that would really be helpful to me, in their opinion. They did not want to, as we found out later on, and even for many years after, they have no intention of really acknowledging anybody's mental health issues. And
Wait, say that again. As we found
the,
out.
as we found out, right, for whatever reason, I don't know if they're afraid of how it's perceived, but they really deny people's mental health.
So they have a
And
history of doing that?
they have a history of
Oh.
doing that. And this was a classic example of I was the first person to ask for an IEP and for help due to, diagnosed clinical depression of any type of mental health. Besides, a lot of people who get them, maybe it's just behavioral issues or learning disabilities like dyslexia or something along that lines. And they refused. And this
Was that your sole diagnosis, clinical depression?
clinical depression and general anxiety disorder.
Okay.
Um, So again, and I'm not trying to make excuses or blame them for what I would later do. I'm just kind of laying the groundwork of how my mind started to hold a grudge against them
Mhm.
and to started to believe, well, I was feeling further isolated, because not only that, when they denied me, they said, if we're not giving you what you need here, try homeschooling then. If you don't like what we're doing, try homeschooling.
Mhm.
And I did. But as so many people will tell you, that's one of the worst things you can do, is to further isolate somebody who is struggling with depression. And so here I am trying to do my schoolwork, but I'm no longer able to interact with friends. So the only positive part of my education, of usually going to school, is hanging out with friends, being a part of that everyday process. And yet that was suddenly no longer there. And
So is this
I,
all in the 10th year, your 10th grade? Is this
correct.
all happening then? Okay.
Yeah. And so pretty quickly I said, nope, I'm not doing this anymore. I send me back to the school. I'll do what I can there. Um, However, obviously, when I go back, it's problematic. My mom ends up hiring an attorney to try to get, the help for me. And it was only with an attorney threatening lawsuits and publicity that the school finally said, okay, we'll give you an IEP. We'll
Mhm.
give you the, class reduction that my psychiatrist and everybody had been pushing for, so that I could focus on the classes that I was passing. And, you know, there were so many classes that I hadn't really been going to, I hadn't been doing the work for, and I was going to fail them anyways. So I was able to pass a couple of classes, and I still had to go to summer school. And again, I held that grudge against the school of, if we'd only done this sooner, if only I had gotten this, I could have passed more of my classes. I could have done well. They wouldn't even give me the tutoring that I've been asking for, you know.
You didn't get
So,
tutoring in your IEP?
well, I'm saying before the IEP, like they had
Okay.
like
Okay.
a tutoring program,
Right.
and
And you were
um,
failing you were failing at least one class, right?
oh, I was failing a couple of classes. Yeah,
And you
you
asked for
know,
tutoring in those
I
classes
was
and you were
asking for
denied?
tutoring, and like, I could stay after class and be with the teacher or with other students, but like they had a program in which there was, um, like a teacher's aide that was in going around and helping people out.
Yeah.
And again, that was something that was denied to me until basically May of the school year, and I'd already failed everything. That's when they finally gave me my IEP, was a couple weeks before the end of the school year.
Hmm. That's
Yeah,
not too helpful because I know
no.
from personal experience it takes quite a while to set those up. So when you said, John, that you started to hold a grudge
Mhm.
towards the school, was that grudge developing? Was the hard feeling towards the actual school, or was it towards individual adults that you worked with within the school? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there was definitely a grudge towards one or two of the adults of the main principal. Um, but yeah, I mean, as a whole, there was just kind of an overall, they didn't want to help me, they don't care about me,
Mhm.
and I was pretty much blaming the school in its entirety. Um, and yeah, so again, when I returned the following year, even though I had failed most of my classes and they were calling me a junior, but I was basically retaking a lot of my sophomore classes, I was doing a little bit better where I had been managing my depression a little bit better. However, this becomes the other issue is when I was doing better, feeling better, and people were happy, they were proud of me, proud of the progress I was making. I was also then afraid to admit when I was still struggling, when I was still kind of having those moments of, two steps forward, one step back. I didn't
Mhm.
want to admit to that one step back. I wanted everybody to see me as doing nothing but progressing, as doing nothing but getting better, that all of the bad things was behind us. And I became even further afraid to admit to all of these things, even in therapy. I didn't want to shed light on that darkness within. And that's what I tell people the most is I wish I could have told my teenage self to just be open and to share and you can only get your life back on track when you're admitting and discussing all the things going on within you. You're not going to go to a doctor and only tell him, one or two things and expect for everything to get better. It's just not the way it works.
Mhm.
But I wish more than anything that I had realized that and had been courageous enough, as you talk about courage, if I had been courageous enough to fully open up and to deal with everything going on within me. Because then as as the school year goes on and I turn 16 and I start looking into, okay, well, things yet again aren't working at the school. Even though I had the IEP and I had a little bit of extra help, my mind just wasn't in it. Um,
Can I ask,
so
John, when you
yeah.
say I didn't share everything
Mhm.
within me, what were those things that you wish that you had shared then?
Yeah, so I wish that I had been more upfront about when I was doing better, but I still had those late nights where I couldn't fall asleep and my mind just starts racing and the thoughts of, self-doubt, self-hatred, the suicidal thoughts start to creep in. But you know what? Then I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling better and it's, oh no, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want, that's not happening all the time. So I didn't want to bring that stuff up. And that's what I wish I had. No, is if it's happening even just once in a while, you have to address it. You have to deal with it.
Mhm.
Um, But so when I was now 16 and I wanted to drop out and I wanted to just get my GED, um, I'd also learned that I couldn't do that because I turned 16 after the school year started. And I
Mm.
basically said, well, I'm not going to go anyways. I got to find something else that I can do. And we discovered that I could do a continuing education program at the local community college. And I could be earning college credits, taking college courses while earning my GED. And I tested for it at the college, and yeah, I was approved. Even though now I was basically double enrolled. I was not allowed to drop out of high school, but now I was enrolled in the community college. And in January of 2004, there I was, now I've got, I'm starting up taking classes at the college. I'm feeling better. I'm feeling like, all right, things are moving forward. All that stuff is behind me. Um, but there was still the problems of now I'm not around my regular friends. Now I'm in the college. And even though I was 16 and even though I was a bigger guy, I also felt like I didn't fit in because between the ages of 16 and 18 is a big gap. And I remember being very self-conscious and not really fitting in and not really, I didn't have the ability to make friends there because I felt like, oh, as soon as they find out that I'm a couple years younger, nobody's going to want to talk to me. Nobody's going to want to hang out with me. So I was also not only double enrolled, but now I'm kind of feeling like I'm trying to live two different lives where I'm trying to maintain the friendships with my friends at school, at high school.
Mhm.
And I'm also going to classes at this community college where I'm just not fitting in. I'm, just feeling like an outsider. And it was difficult. I mean, I was dating and I had friends and all these things, but it just wasn't the same, obviously, because I'm not in the high school I'm not going there with everybody Monday through Friday. I'm missing out on so much of that interaction with people. So
Were you just seeing friends on the weekends?
yeah, so it's like, hanging out on the weekends, or at this time, social media wasn't there, but like AOL Instant Messenger,
Mm.
so chatting with friends after in the evenings and everything. Um, and my girlfriend at that time, she lived nearby me, so we would hang out sometimes during the weekdays. But there was definitely, I started to feel more and more disconnected. And so I was just kind of like, all right, I'll power through and I'll push through. But things really start to come to a head when my half brother, who had um, been abusing me when I was younger, and he had been in the military, and his military time was coming to an end. He was coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq, and he was basically saying he wanted to hang out, he wanted to go hunting, he wanted to spend time together. I was like, all right, yeah, no problem. That sounds, maybe we can rehash this relationship. Because again, I wasn't dealing with what he had done to me. I was suppressing it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to admit to it. I didn't want to, I wanted to be brothers despite what he had done to me because I didn't want it to be even present in my mind that no, I can't be around him because of what he did to me. I didn't even want to acknowledge that. So, yeah, I started to talk to my mom about it, and she was obviously against me being around firearms in any way. Um,
Did she know about what happened with you and your half brother? Had you
no,
told her? Okay, you
no,
didn't.
like I said,
Oh,
I
no.
didn't talk about it
Okay.
until years later.
Okay.
Um,
So
but
she didn't want you to be around the firearms.
Right. So I've been around firearms a little bit, um, really before my depression came up. Like they weren't in the house, but my other brother, he had some pistols. And so, I've been to the firing range a few times with him. Um, but then she still didn't want it in the household even then because of my age. But then when the depression kicked in and I started admitting that I was suicidal, of course, she did not want them in the house. But here I am later on the outside doing better, and I'm not admitting to that I'm still struggling at times. And I'm telling her I'm doing better. I am. And
Mhm.
I went in and told my therapist about it. And I said, I just want to be able to hang out with my brother, to be able to go hunting. What do you think? And he said, yeah, he didn't see a problem with it. And he brought my mom in, and we both still remember that very specifically when he told my mom, you have your son back. Those were his exact words. And that to my mom was, oh, okay, like this has just been like a really bad patch in his, teenage years that some kids go through. He's doing better now. And even my psychiatrist said the same thing, as no, she had no problem with me being around firearms. She said, you're okay.
Now, were
And
you still on medication at this point for
so
depression?
so at this point, I had been taken off of all of my medication except for Xanax. I was still on Xanax to deal with some of the anxiety issues that I was struggling with,
So
but I
Xanax
had been
periodically, or did you take it on a regular basis?
a pretty regular basis. I was given it and told basically 3 times a day or as needed. Um, so yeah,
It's a pretty liberal prescription, I would think.
yeah.
Xanax.
So
And
when
were you taking it like it was prescribed only a few times a day? Or I'm just curious what your usage was.
Yeah, so I was taking it regularly. Um, I wasn't abusing it. I didn't even think of it. I didn't learn until later on that Xanax is kind of like a narcotic that's very popular among people. I
Mhm.
just saw it as just another medication because I'd been on so many. It was just another medication to help me. And
Help with your anxiety.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Um, so when my mother hears that my therapist, my psychiatrist, they both say that they don't have a problem with me being around firearms. Okay. She even speaks with the local police department and says, hey, is there anything I should be mindful of, law wise, or what's the issue of having firearms in the household? I have a 16-year-old son. And they basically say, just keep it locked up. Other than that, that's it. And there was a local gun store that was going out of business. And so my mom said, hey, why don't we go down there? We'll take advantage of, they're having a going out of business sale. I said, all right, yeah, sure. And so she started to look at shotguns because she had done a bit of like skeet shooting and, target shooting in her younger years. And so, yeah, so she was interested in that for herself. And she figured I could use it when I went hunting with my brother. So that's what she did. She bought one of them. And
What kind of gun did she buy for you?
so it was a 12 gauge shotgun. It was a Winchester. And yeah, I mean, when we were doing that, when we were at the gun store, there was no ill intent in my mind. And this is on Saturday. This is actually 2 days before the shooting. And in my mind, I'm just kind of like, all right, great. Like this will be something that I'm able to, use to go hunting. Like I felt trusted. I felt believed in. But then the problem was later on that day when, some other family and friends hear about this, they're concerned. And they share that concern with me out of their love because they're still afraid that I might, hurt myself or kill myself. But in my mind, I start to distort that of, oh, you don't believe in me. You don't trust me. I've been doing all of these things to get my life on track. I've been, opening up in therapy, although I really wasn't. But this is what I'm telling myself is I've been moving forward. Why don't you believe in me? Why don't you trust me? Why don't you see me as just like everybody else? And I start to downward spiral. And even as I'm out Saturday night with friends and we're having a great time, but as they're sharing their concerns of like, oh shit, like John, be careful, we're worried about you. They loved me, they they still saw me as a great friend, but they were concerned. And yeah, by Sunday morning, I'm waking up and I'm just kind of like, you know what? Nobody believes in me. I'm never going to be trusted. I'm never going to be seen like everybody else. Everything I've ever thought about doing for the rest of my life is never going to happen. And I start to just be like, all right, I gotta end it. I gotta die. That's the only way. And I start telling myself that, and I start thinking about it more and more. And I've thought about it obviously many times before, but now here I am also thinking about, you know what? I don't want my mom to come home and find me like she was always afraid of. And I start to blame the school. I start to say, you know what? It's their fault that my life hasn't gone the way it should have. I didn't want to take accountability. I didn't want to say that it was my fault, that there's more that I could have done. So I
Mhm,
wanted to blame others.
mhm.
I wanted to not just blame them, but now I wanted to make sure that they felt my pain. And I
When
wanted
did it
them,
turn? When did it turn to that? So it started out as suicidal ideation, which you
right,
were already having anyway, but you weren't telling people. And
right.
had you ever thought about how you would commit suicide before you got the gun?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd thought about it and I'd actually attempted it um, at one point, you know, right before I went to the mental hospital as well. I was not only cutting myself, but I hadn't told people I had taken a whole bunch of pills and swallowed them with whiskey, you know.
What kind of
Um,
pills?
I don't even remember, to be honest with you. I just went into the medicine cabinet, popped open whatever was there. Like, I didn't do any research on it. I was just thinking, like, all right, if I take a whole bunch of, I remember one of them was a whole bunch of NyQuil, you know, because I remember thinking, like, all right, this is the stuff that really, like, you know, makes you drowsy, puts you to sleep. If I take a whole bunch of it, you know, hopefully this is going to be something that'll put me out permanently.
Mhm,
Um, and I would just end up for the next few days. I woke up and I was just, you know, violently ill. And my mom thought that I just had the stomach flu.
mhm.
Um, but so now that I had my hands on a gun, now I'm thinking there's no attempt. There's no pain. I'm not going to wake up after a failed attempt in pain. I'm going to pull the trigger and I'll be dead. That's it. You know, but again, I also thought about if I do it at home or if I go out into the woods, I'll just be forgotten. Nobody will even know that I'm gone. Because again, I'm not at the high school. I'm at the community college where I never really even made an attempt to fit in. And I'm thinking my friends won't even notice that I'm gone for a while.
Did you feel
And
seen at the community college? Did the teachers, did you feel like the teachers knew your name, knew you? Did you talk with people while you were there? I'm just curious.
yeah, so like I did talk a little bit with you know, with some of my classmates there, and it was probably more in my head. Like I probably fit in more than I realized.
Mhm,
Um, and there were class sizes where no, you know, the professors didn't know who I was. They didn't, you know, I'm just one of 30 or 40 people who signed up for their class. And I didn't really make an attempt to connect. I was only there for about a month until the shooting happened. But but yeah, so I wanted to force myself to be seen, to force myself to be heard, to force people to feel my pain, you know, because I didn't want to be just, you know, I didn't want to just disappear and have people forget about me. There was that desire to be remembered, to not be forgotten.
So,
And
John, did you ever look at other school shooters? Did you ever um, research how they did it, and how far in advance had you been doing that? I'm just curious.
yeah, so I tell people like I was in middle school when Columbine happened. I don't really remember, um, you know, that day or even the next day, but I do remember kind of the atmosphere changed where suddenly we all realized like somebody can come in here and start shooting.
Mhm,
And I wasn't particularly interested in it. Um, I did end up reading later on a bit about Columbine and about others. I wouldn't call it research as much as I was initially afraid of
mhm,
actually I was afraid of being a victim. You know,
mhm,
that was a part of my anxiety. I remember not wanting to sit next to the door in a classroom because I figured if somebody comes in and starts shooting, they're going to shoot at the people who are closest to them first. And I remember thinking about that. I remember wanting to sit next to a window because I'm thinking if anything happens, I'm going out the window if I'm on a first floor classroom.
Yep.
So I actually was afraid of this. And eventually I started to, become interested in, I wanted to be able to protect myself. I had a knife for a little while. I wanted a gun because I felt like I wanted to be able to protect myself. But then it also, when I did get my hands on a gun, and it's not something where people believe in me, where people trust in me. Now it's, going from wanting to protect myself to wanting to kill myself and wanting to use it as a tool of destruction, of spreading that pain and suffering to others, you know. So when I went into my school, my intent was not to go on a killing spree. My intent was to traumatize, to terrorize, and to make sure that I was seen and heard. You
Okay,
know,
so wait a minute. You actually bought the gun on Friday and
Saturday, my mom
on
bought it.
Saturday, and then you start having these thoughts because you have suicidal ideation anyway. You start
Mhm.
thinking, I wow, now I have a gun. I could use this to kill myself. And then
Right,
you start thinking about your mom finding your body and this is so sad and whose fault is it? And it's the school's fault. So that's Sunday you have that. And then
right.
do you go into your school on Monday?
Monday
Did that
morning.
happen? Monday morning. That was a
So this is not a thought out, planned.
when you
This
bought that gun on a Friday, you did not have a thought
no.
about
I
you
was
didn't.
excited to be able to, like I said, to go hunting. My mom talked about skeet shooting. That's what I was thinking about, you know. And although I had suicidal tendencies, um,
Then you had a grudge against your school
and I
for
had a
not
grudge,
shooting.
but I had also believed in my mind. I was, I was upset at that moment, like when, when we're in the gun store, I'm not thinking about the high school that much I'm still in my mind thinking, you know what, I'm moving forward with my life. I'm getting the progress that I've always wanted. I've started at the community college, and although things aren't great there, I'm doing something and I have a future. But it was that sudden downward spiral when people shared their love and concern for me. I started to say, I have no future. I have no future where people will believe in me, where they'll trust me. And yeah, so this was a very spur of the moment thing. This was not a long planned out, you know, shooting. This was not something where I really had much of a plan because I literally, to go into that morning, I drive myself into school late, and I know that even though I'm not attending it anymore, I'm still technically a student, and I just throw on a backpack. The gun is in its case, which is like a hard plastic case, which I know people will just see me and assume that it's like an instrument case.
Hmm.
And I walk in. And,
Walk
like I
in, you
said,
open the door, you just walk.
yeah,
Okay.
I walk into my high school, right in through the front door, and yeah, there's nobody there. So I just walk through and I go up to the second floor where the classrooms and everything is. And but it's at that moment that again, I don't have a plan. I don't have any idea of what I'm doing. I just kind of gone on autopilot. So now I'm going up in there and I'm just kind of like, all right, let me go into the bathroom. So I go into the bathroom, I go into the stall, and for a while I'm just sitting there
What's
thinking,
going
what,
through your head?
honestly, now that I'm actually in there, I'm wanting to leave, like now that this idea of what I would do is becoming a reality, I'm second guessing myself and I'm just kind of like, I wanted to leave. And I became afraid that okay, I was able to get in no problem, but what happens if I'm walking out the door? Somebody's going to see me and say, "What are you doing?" And I would start becoming afraid of getting caught that way. So I started to tell myself I'm at the point of no return. I can't stop. I have to do this now. And that's the other thing I always want to tell people is it's never too late to stop, you know. Um, but yeah, so I'm sitting there for a while, and I'd even sent a couple of text messages. I even tried calling one or two of my friends because I'm thinking like I part of me is still trying to talk myself out of it. Part of me is still trying to figure out somebody can help me get out of here, you
But
know.
you're texting your friends, there's going to be a school shooting, you need to leave the school, right?
That was the last text message that I sent. Was when I said, "I'm in school with a gun. Get out." Those were my words. And um, but I had sent previous ones. I had made previous phone calls
While
um,
you were in the bathroom?
while I was sitting in the bathroom.
And what were those?
Those were pretty much just me reaching out and trying to be like, "Hey, what's up?" Because I'm just trying to get somebody to talk back with me and to basically maybe you
Talk you out
know
of it?
talk me out of it, to help calm me down
Did
and
you
to
reach anyone?
no, but again, I also look back and I realized I could have called my mom. I could have called my therapist. I could have made so many other phone calls or done something, but it was also the fear of, and I think the same reason why I never opened up to my mom about just how suicidal I was, or I never opened up to my mom or others about the sexual abuse is also, and I tell parents this all the time, is sometimes as kids, we try to protect our family. We try to protect our parents from what's going on within us. And I didn't want to admit to her, and I didn't even want to call her from that bathroom stall because in my mind, it was either all or nothing. Either I'm going to somehow get out of here without her knowing, or I'm going to die, you know. But eventually, yeah, I believe I'm at the point of no return. And I send a text message to my friends and I say, "I'm in school with a gun, get out." And it's because I didn't want them to see me. I wanted people to see me, to feel my pain. I wanted them to forever remember seeing me that day with that gun and to feel that terror. But I didn't want that for my friends. That's why I sent them the text. And yeah, I don't know if you want to talk how much about like what actually happened with the shooting.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So I'd been in there for a while, and I remember, one class period ends, and I
Heard
waited
the
until
bell?
yeah, so the bell rings, and, everybody's in the hallway,
Mhm.
people even come into the bathroom, and I'm still sitting there, and I'm sitting there with the shotgun in my hands, and I'm in the stall, and nobody knows.
Mhm.
And, but I wait because I want basically to be able to go out into an empty hallway. So I
Mhm.
wait for a while. The bell rings, next period starts, and I wait another minute or two, and that's when I come out. But as I'm starting to walk out of the bathroom, I've got the shotgun down at my hips. And then suddenly, this one student, he's starting to come into the bathroom and he sees me and he freezes in terror. And I still remember he says, "This can't be happening. This can't be real."
Did you know him?
No,
Okay.
you know, but he's right there. He's literally maybe 3 feet in front of me.
So you're still in the bathroom and he's coming in as you're
Well, no,
going
as
out.
I'm walking out, so it's kind of one of those like little privacy hallways, you know what I mean? As
Okay.
you're entering in,
Okay.
I'm literally walking out, walking into the main hallway as he's coming around the corner and to enter into the bathroom. So I've got the gun down at my hips. I'm walking forward as he's now walking towards me when he freezes and stands in front of me, saying that this can't be real. And, you know, he turns around after a moment and runs away. And I just walk out of the bathroom and I come around the corner and, I hadn't fired at him, but when I come around the corner, I now see two other students coming around the other corner about 40 feet away. And with them far enough away, I point the gun up and away from them and I fire, you know.
So had he ran away ostensibly to tell people that
He ran away, and I later learned out that he basically ran away, ran into the very first classroom that was right there, slams the door shut.
Okay, so those kids that came around the corner, they had no idea that they were going to be facing a gunman.
Right. So like I said, as when I come around the corner, now I'm talking about these are kids who hadn't seen the first students because they're coming around another corner down the hallway, 40 feet away from where the bathroom was. So when I come out and I come around that corner and I see them, one of them actually screams out, "Oh shit." And I remember that because he's right in front of a classroom where right now it's everybody else, it's any other's day. And there was a teacher in that classroom who hears him yelling that. And I remember her saying to him, she says, watch your mouth, watch your language. Because to her, it's any other day, you
Mhm.
know. So that's why she hears a student yelling that. And that's all she's thinking is, watch your mouth.
Mhm.
And that's when I pointed up and away from them and I fired.
Mhm.
And they, immediately they go right back, from around the corner where they were. And I fire again. And
So you
I basically,
fired into the ceiling?
yeah, so the very first one went, like I said, up into the ceiling and kind of hit into the corner because it's bird shot. I'm also using 7.5 grade bird shot. So we're not dealing with slugs or buckshot. We're dealing with small bird shot pellets. And so it's
So
a pretty
that
big.
scatter pattern isn't that large, correct?
Well, because of the distance of how far,
Okay.
like, it spread pretty far.
Okay.
But as I showing people, the video that the police took later on, yeah, it went up into the ceiling. It hit some of the upper parts of the wall,
Mhm.
and so I wasn't shooting at them. I was more of making a statement of I'm here and I'm, terrorizing them. I'm traumatizing them. To this day, 20 years later, they're still suffering because of me.
Mhm.
And I
What's going
wanted
through
that.
your head? What's going through your head at that time? What thoughts are you thinking? Are you thinking maniacal thoughts like uh you know that you have the power now, or I'm just curious what your thought.
Honestly, at that point, I'm on autopilot. I'm not really even in my mind. There's not a lot of thoughts going through. I'm just going through the motions. Like when people say that they saw me that day and my face was just blank, like there was nothing there, it's because I completely separated myself from
Mhm.
what I was doing. I wasn't fully there in the moment. I was just going through the motions.
Mhm.
And after I fired those two shots, now I'm just walking around. And in my mind, I'm thinking either
So the
I'm
two
going to,
shots, so you shot one above the kids that were coming around the corner, and then what was your
right.
second shot?
So then the second shot ends up going, like they came around a corner from my perspective on the left. I fired again to the right, but now this time it hits the wall, and it hits the wall closer to me, kind of, in between where they were and where I was. Um, so it was again away from where they had been, even though they had run away. Um, but yeah, and so that second shot when it hits the wall, also now it's everybody in those classrooms is now feeling, not only hearing the explosion of the shotgun going off, now they're feeling as the wall and everything is shaking from that second shot.
Mhm. Was that a wall adjacent to a classroom? Was there a
Yeah,
classroom
so
on the
that
other side
was,
of that wall?
yeah, that was that was a wall connected to a classroom. It's basically they had these like metal type walls. So it's, basically now it's shaking everything. And now I'm just walking around. I'm walking up and down the hall. And like I said, I figured I'd either wait for the police to come or I would finally be able to, pull the trigger on myself. But as I'm walking down the hall, it's completely empty. All these classroom doors are closed. I'm not even paying too much attention to them until out of the corner of my eye, I notice one of the classroom doors is open. And I walk over and I step into the doorway and I look in and I see everybody on the ground hiding from me. And I see the teacher at the front, and she just kind of looks up at me in terror, and she calls out, "Oh Lord." And there's even one student who pops up her head above the desk because she had just been one of the people I was hanging out with Saturday night. I was with a large group of friends. Her and I weren't close, but she's now looking at me with recognition, but also terror and confusion. But I think all I wanted at that moment was to be seen, but also now you're going to see something that you're never going to unsee.
Hey, hey, oh. It's all part of us. We can all choose love. It'll lift you up if you let